All right. Good morning, everybody. My name is Liz Schaller. I am the NIMAC director, joined this morning by Nicole Gaines, our NIMAC project director. And this is a new webinar. We haven't done this one before, but we thought it would be good to have an opportunity to really dive deep into our metadata best practices and answer any questions that you all might have about metadata. We have a lot of ground to cover today. We're going to start with talking about the key resources that you should be consulting when you create NIMAS files. Then we'll talk about the NIMAS metadata and where that appears in your NIMAS file in both the PDF and OPF files. Then we'll talk about how to supply NIMAS metadata. And then we'll jump into our metadata best practices for each metadata element. And then we'll wrap up with some final hints and additional resources. Our learning objectives for today are to understand the key resources to consult in the creation of complete and accurate NIMAS metadata, to understand how to use the Excel to OPF tool, and to reinforce NIMAS metadata best practices. I did also want to remind everybody that we have one more webinar coming up. This one is tomorrow, Wednesday, August 12th at 2 p.m. Eastern, and it is specifically for individuals at a publishing house who work directly with customers and assist customers in obtaining accessible formats of their materials. So please do share this with your colleagues. We are looking forward to it. Okay, so first topic, let's talk about the key resources that you should be consulting as you prepare your NIMAS files. In our part 2 webinar, where we talked about XML best practices, we focused on the first 2 of the 3 essential resources in this list, the NIMAS specification and the DAISY structure guidelines. Today, we're going to focus on that third essential resource, our NIMAC metadata guidelines. And our metadata guidelines are available in 2 formats. There is a downloadable Word doc version of our metadata guidelines, as well as an HTML version on our website. So you have 2 ways to access our metadata guidelines. These guidelines were developed by the NIMAC, and they're based on the requirements of the NIMAS technical specification, as well as best practices for materials cataloging and discoverability. The guidelines document begins with a metadata overview, including a sample OPF, followed by detailed entries with examples for each metadata field. The guidelines also include our complete NIMAC subject list. That's the only place where you can find our NIMAC subject list. And again, in addition to being available as a downloadable resource, the guidelines can also be accessed directly on our website. All right, so let's jump into where you can find your NIMAS metadata in the NIMAS file set in the OPF and the PDF. So again, we talked about this during our part 2 webinar as well. The PDF that's included in the NIMAS file set is for file review and cataloging purposes only. The PDF always includes the title page and copyright page, and it should also include the covers when needed. And the when needed is that there are several essential metadata fields that are required to be present in the NIMAS PDF. So when those don't appear on the title page or copyright page, then you may need to include the cover as well. And those required elements are the complete title, the ISBN, the publisher imprint, and the copyright statement. The PDF is considered to be the authoritative source for the bibliographic metadata that is supplied with a NIMAS file. If you are submitting NIMAS for digital material that does not have title or copyright pages, you will need to create a simple PDF for the NIMAS file set. We have a guidance document that provides more information on what to include and how to format that PDF. But if you have any questions at all, please do not hesitate to reach out. We're more than happy to help you get that pulled together for your material. All NIMAS file sets must also include an OPF that includes the required metadata, a manifest of all the files in the file set, and a spine that references the XML file. And the OPF contains three types of metadata. There is required metadata that would be supplied by the publisher. There is required metadata that is standard across all of our files. And then there are a few optional metadata fields. The bibliographic metadata that's supplied in the OPF should match what is shown on the PDF for the file set. Again, the PDF is that authoritative source. So what is in the OPF should match what is shown on the PDF. I'm not going to read out this list, but on this slide, you can see all of the required metadata elements that would be supplied by the publisher. So those would include the title and the copyright year and the identifier, series language. A majority of the metadata fields would be supplied by the publisher. On the next slide here, you'll see the required metadata elements that are default or supplied by the vendor, and there are three of those. One is the file format, which will always be NIMAS 1.1, at least for now. All we have is NIMAS 1.1, so that will always be your file format. Then the NIMAS file creation date, which would be supplied by the vendor, and that is the date when you created the NIMAS file set. And then finally, the default rights statement, which is provided on this slide. This rights statement should be present in every NIMAS file set. And then finally, we have optional metadata, and that optional metadata includes the source book pagination, as well as publisher notes. And I will say there's a caveat there because occasionally publisher notes are required, and we'll get into that in more detail here in a few moments. But these are, again, your optional metadata elements. Okay, before we move on to how to supply your NIMAS metadata, does anyone have any questions about that overview? Okay, I'm not hearing any questions.
Okay, well, I think we will go ahead and move on. And I'm going to talk a little bit now about supplying NIMAS metadata and why it is so important. Um, you may recall if you were a part of our earlier presentation where we were talking about creating NIMAS files, that it's really important in terms of the way that users search the system. When files are uploaded to the NIMAC, the system actually extracts the OPF metadata that is submitted to create the searchable records available to users. So when we get really picky about the metadata and want it to be complete and want it to be accurate, this has a direct impact on our users. And so that's really why we want to ensure that it is high quality. Even though the NIMAC search interface is pretty, it's reliable, it's speedy, it's a good search, but it's not a Google search. So in other words, if you get the ISBN wrong, the NIMAC isn't going to be able to say, did you actually mean this book? You know, it's kind of your search is either going to succeed or it's not going to succeed. And so that metadata accuracy and completeness are really important. The other piece of this is that the OPF metadata, there are pieces of this that are examined when there is the validation, the automated validation upon file submission. And so when certain metadata are missing or if it's formatted incorrectly, this can actually cause your file submission to fail. And that is the case whether it's a manual upload or delivery by FTP. And so just to avoid any delays in that upload process, you want to just check and ensure that all of the metadata are present and correct. Now, the caveat there is that a successful upload does not necessarily mean that the metadata is complete or correct. That validation does not, is not able to evaluate all possible issues or missing metadata. And so some metadata issues are identified at the point of the file review for certification. So as Liz mentioned before, the PDF of the file set, that is our authoritative source for the bibliographic metadata. And when staff are reviewing your files for certification, they are actually checking that OPF against the PDF that was submitted with the file set. And so again, using established practices for library cataloging, we check to ensure that the metadata supplied matches the book as well as the XML file to ensure like does the ISBN in the XML also reflect what's in the OPF and what is in the on the on the PDF. And so, so the main thing of importance here is again that if different metadata are used internally to track items, for example, an abbreviated title or what have you, you still want to use that printed book to be the authoritative source for your NIMAS metadata. At the point of file review, the NIMAC does routinely make minor corrections, and so we want to emphasize that this is something we are happy to do. You know, it's always possible to leave something minor out, and we can make those changes. The benefit to publishers and vendors is that when these changes are saved to the system record, they are also saved to your OPF file. So these corrections they're in the file themselves as well. So that's just something that is a service that the NIMAC provides. However, we are a small shop. We have a very small staff and we receive thousands of NIMAS files each year. And so if there are a number of metadata errors, or if the same error is present across a large number of files submitted, we may need to ask that the vendor make those corrections. So that's just a heads up on that. We do encourage vendors to reach out, especially if you have a new program that you're going to be submitting that has a lot of files. If you want to send us a PDF and your OPF for the different types of components in the program, we are more than happy to get you a good template going so that you can be on the right track with that. Just email us at nimac@aph.org. And again, we're just happy to provide that feedback for you. Another tool that you may want to keep in mind, and again, this is optional, it's available in the system, is we have a tool in the NIMAC that is available to all publishers and vendors called the Excel to OPF tool. And it's a really simple tool to use, and we encourage you to try it out. It does not have any impact on your inventory or your files or anything like that. It's just something that is an option for you. And it can be beneficial, especially if you do have a really large program that you're going to be delivering. Basically, the way that it works is that you download the metadata template from the resources tab of your NIMAC account, and it's basically just what you would expect. It's a spreadsheet that has one column for each metadata element, and you just fill in one line of the sheet for each OPF that you're needing to produce, and then you upload it back to the system using the Transform Excel to OPF menu option. And what the system will basically do is it will do that transformation really quickly, and then it will email you a zip file that basically includes a starter OPF for every item that you have included in the Excel sheet. So one thing that we like to note is that we did make some minor changes to that template in 2024. So if you have used the tool in the past, but not for a while, be sure to upload the most recent version of that template. The last thing that I'll say about that is that what that tool will do is that it will ensure that the metadata you included in that spreadsheet is correctly tagged and correctly formatted, but it will not yet be complete. You do still need to, on your own, add that manifest and spine portion of the OPF. But once you've done that, then you've got your metadata ready to include with your NIMAS file set. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Liz to kick us off with our metadata best practices. But before that, are there any questions about what's been covered so far?
Yeah, please feel free to unmute and ask your question out loud if you have one. Okay, I'm not hearing any, so we'll jump in. We're going to go through all of our metadata fields. So we split them in half. So I'll cover the first half and then I'll hand it back to Nicole and she'll cover the second half. So let's kick it off with content type. There are 5 content type options that can be used for the content that you supplied to the NIMAC. And you should always use the option that best describes the content of the book. One thing I do want to note here is that more and more often, we are seeing core instructional content like textbooks that do include write-on lines that are something that you can fill out. Those do still count as textbooks. They should not be submitted as consumables because they are the core instructional content. So just a note on that. Similarly, if the material that you're submitting is digital instructional material, you should utilize that content type even if it's also a textbook or it's also a consumable. We want to make sure that those are labeled digital instructional materials. And finally, to note that other category is very important and it should always be utilized for materials where only the student-facing pages are being submitted to the NIMAC. So when that's the case, it should always be that other category, again, even if it might fit in one of those other categories. All right, copyright date. This element reflects the copyright date of the print book. And if there's no copyright date found on the print book, which we are seeing more and more frequently that the copyright date is not included, and the publisher has not supplied a date, please go ahead and use the publication year. We do verify the copyright date with the publisher when it is not found on the material, and often because there is also no publication year on the material either. So that is one metadata element where the NIMAC typically, in the course of file review, will follow up with the publisher if the year is not printed on the material. And if the copyright statement includes more than one date, please use the most recent date when supplying the metadata. Creator. The creator element is used to capture the authors, editors, or illustrators that are credited on the title page of the print book or on the cover if there's no title page. When you are supplying the creators, please be sure to use the correct role attribute in the OPF. So either the author, editor, or illustrator. And please enter the name as it appears on the book, but not including the titles or credentials or any other phrases. We'll see a couple examples here on the next slide of how these should be correctly formatted. We'll also note that this is not a required element. This element can be left empty. You don't need to fill it in with the publisher, for example, if there are no other authors listed on the material. And here are a few examples. In example 1 on the book, you'll see by Paul Smith, PhD, and Amy Jordan, MA, edited by Alex Andrews. And in the OPF, you'll see we've used that creator tag 3 times, utilizing the correct element, either author or editor, and then excluding the credentials. So just Paul Smith, not Paul Smith, PhD, when you're supplying that metadata. And then in example 2, this is an example when the publisher or the organization should be listed as an author. So on the book, it says created by the Lawrence University Math Project. So you'll just supply Lawrence University Math Project as the author for the material. Next format, as I mentioned earlier, NIMAS 1.1 is the only format that is accepted by the NIMAC at this time. This element must be present in the OPF for all NIMAS file sets. Grade level. Grade level is a metadata element similar to creator that can be repeated. This element can be repeated up to 7 times. And if you're not sure which grade levels apply to the book that you're working on, please consult with the publisher about that. Our list goes from pre-K, pre-kindergarten, all the way through grade 12. And the example on the right-hand side of the screen is typical metadata that you would see for a high school algebra textbook. So you have that grade level metadata element, repeated 4 times, supplying grades 9, 10, 11, 12. That's a very common grade range, and that's how you would supply a grade range. You will just repeat the element with a single grade level each time. Next, identifier. This element reflects the ISBN that's found on the print book, followed by the letters NIMAS, N-I-M-A-S. This element does not repeat, and if there is more than one ISBN that's found on the print book, you want to use the first 13-digit ISBN that's found. The identifier is really important because it's also used as the zip file name for the NIMAS file set, as well as the file name for the XML, PDF, and OPF files. So you'll see in the example here, you have that 13-digit ISBN followed by NIMAS. That is how your identifier should be formatted. Next up, language. You want to use the 2-letter language code that's found in the link Alexa popped in the chat, the ISO 639. And this element can be repeated up to 2 times. Please use a separate OPF element for each language. We'll see here on this next slide a couple of examples of that. So when you are working on a textbook that is teaching a foreign language, typically you would supply 2 languages for that. You would supply English, but then you would also supply the language that's being taught. So in this first example, you have both French and English. Then in example 2, this is just an English language textbook, so you supply just a single language there. And then for example 3, this is a textbook that is entirely in Spanish, so you would only use a single language there, Spanish. I will note here when we receive materials for language for programs that are in Spanish, sometimes some of the front matter is provided in English because it's just part of the larger program. In those cases, you do not need to also include English as a second language because that's just that front matter piece that's just part of the more general program. It's not the actual core language of the material at all. So just Spanish for those is perfectly fine. Next, we have MathML. There's not a NIMAS OPF element for capturing whether the XML contains MathML tagging. However, if the file contains MathML, the NIMAC system will detect this upon upload and automatically add this information to the record. We ask that you please do not manually add MathML metadata to a system record. If the system has not supplied MathML metadata upon upload, this means that MathML was not detected by the system during the file validation process. If you have any questions about that at all, please don't hesitate to reach out. We're happy to help. Next, NIMAS file creation date. So this is another one of those required metadata elements that's supplied by the vendor. In this case, you want to use the format year, all 4 digits, followed by month, followed by day. And the thing that I want to make sure to emphasize here is if you are doing a resubmission of a revised file set to replace a file that's already certified, please be sure to update the NIMAS file creation date when you upload that resubmission. If you don't, the NIMAC is going to do that. We will update the file creation date, but it's very helpful if you will go ahead and update your file creation date at the point of uploading that resubmitted file. Next up, numerical addition. This element should be used whenever a numerical addition statement is present on the print book. If no statement is present, please just leave that tag empty. And you want to use the format numeral and then the suffix and then ed period. So second ed period. And the one thing that's really important to note here is please do not include first edition in the metadata unless it appears on the print book, unless it is printed on the print book on the PDF. We do check for that when we review the PDF during the file review process, and we will just remove first edition from the metadata if it is not present on the material. Another thing to note is that if there is any additional edition information that's not numerical, aside from state edition, that should be included in the publisher note field. So we'll look at a few examples of that here. In example one, you'll see on the title page, it shows American History third edition. Very simple, just supply third edition in the numerical edition tag. Example two shows Geography fourth edition, fully revised and expanded. So in that case, you're going to use two metadata elements to capture that. First, you're going to capture the numerical edition, fourth edition. And then with the publisher note, you're going to capture that fully revised and expanded. Next up, publisher. Publisher reflects the publisher imprint or imprints that are shown on the title page of the print book. This is a field that does not repeat. So if there are two imprints or publisher logos found on the print book, the publisher metadata should capture both separated by a slash. Imprints are something that the NIMAC staff actually control, which show up within a publisher account. So if you are going to upload a file and you are not seeing the imprint that you need in the account, please reach out to the NIMAC before you upload the file and let us know that you need a new imprint added. We will go in and add that for you, and then you'll be able to upload the file. Um, we much prefer this to you just uploading the file to whatever imprint is there, and then we have to go in and change that and edit that. It's better if we just get the correct imprint in there at the outset so that you have the right spot to upload your files. But if you're not seeing the imprint, you're not wrong. It's okay. Just reach out to us and let us know, and we will add it for you. Here are a couple examples. Example one shows what you would supply if there's just a single imprint on the PDF. And then example two shows how you would supply two imprints. So you'll see National Geographic Learning / Cengage Learning. And now publisher notes. They are optional, but not always exactly optional elements. It can be used by the publisher to supply additional information related to a title, like a short description or maybe a catalog number. Some of our publishers like to include their own catalog numbers in their records. Um, Please don't use this element to repeat any metadata that's been supplied elsewhere. And it is fine to leave this element empty if no note is applicable or desired. But there are a few situations where the publisher note is actually required. The first is, again, like we just saw a few moments ago, when a non-numerical addition statement is found on the title page, that should be captured using this element. The second situation is if there's a new printing or updated file set that's submitted after a file has been available in certified inventory for a year or more, we would expect a supersedes note to be supplied in that resubmitted file that references the reason for resubmission. And we'll look at an example here in a moment. And then the third is when a file is submitted that includes only the student-facing pages from a teacher ancillary, there should be a note included indicating that the file set is partial. And we'll look again at an example of that as well. NIMAS files that are submitted to the NIMAC are required to include the complete contents of the printed book with one exception. And that exception to this rule relates to ancillary materials that are published primarily for the use of teachers. The NIMAC and files submitted to NIMAC can only be used to serve students, K-12 students. So that is why we can only accept the pages from those ancillaries that are distributed directly to students. If you are submitting a NIMAS file for this type of material, a note indicating that it's a partial file set is required. And additionally, as I mentioned a few slides back, the content type for those materials should always be captured as other. So here are a few examples. Example of our first instance where a publisher note would be required is that non-numerical edition information. Here we have a custom edition statement. That's kind of a typical example of non-numerical edition information that should be included. This example two is that supersedes note. So again, that's for a file that had previously been certified for over a year and it's being resubmitted. You'll need to include a note like this, and it reads, this file supersedes the file set submitted on January 31st, 2022. File is resubmitted to reflect an updated printing and include MathML tagging. And then finally, example three is for that partial file set that we just talked about. You'll want to include a note that states this file is incomplete. It contains only the pages distributed directly to students. All right, that was a lot of information. Before I hand it over to Nicole, does anyone have any questions about any of these metadata fields so far?
Hi Liz, this is
Hi.
Prithvi.
Hi.
You mentioned about these publisher notes being required for certain type of categories. So,
Yes.
are these the standard sentences, or is it something will vary depending on the type of content? Like, I mean, I understand these are the examples that are done, but
Right.
if we have like a supersedes note, so this is the standard content that should be submitted, or it can vary from the one that is given as an example.
That's a great question. So this format is the standard format we would expect to see for a supersedes note, but the rationale for the resubmission could vary. It's important to include the original date of the first file that was certified. So that's in the first sentence, but that second sentence it could include whatever the reasoning is for the resubmission. This note doesn't need to include all of the details of the updated printing. It doesn't need to be, a paragraph long. Just stating that it reflects an updated printing is sufficient. Does that answer your question?
Sure, and yes, it does. Resolve my question. So, and the supersedes note is to be included when we are resupplying anything, right? But there is a resubmission happening.
Yes, again, only for materials that are older, like over a year old. So they
Okay.
were certified. We've had a lot of resubmissions this year for materials that were submitted at the beginning of 2026. Those would not require a supersedes note. But if something was originally certified more than a year ago, then it would.
Okay. Thank you for clarification.
Absolutely. Yeah. Any other questions? All right. Take it away, Nicole.
Okay, well, with that, we're going to dive into a few more of these metadata elements. The rights element, that is a default metadata statement that must be present in the OPF for all NIMAS files, so it is required. It does not repeat. However, if a publisher wants to append another, a supplemental rights statement after the default statement, they are welcome to do that. However, it has to appear in the same tags, and it must follow the default rights statement which must be identical for every file. One of the things that's important about the way the system works is that if this identical language isn't found in your rights statement, the system will supply it. And so the important thing here is that if the wording is off even a little bit, or there's an extra space or a missing comma, the system will not recognize that you have included the default statement and it will supply it. So occasionally we will see cases where the right statement isn't identical. And so what we have are duplicate right statements. And so just to avoid that, just make sure that you copy and paste the identical language into your rights statement. Next, I want to talk a little bit about series. This is one of those metadata elements that is required if it's applicable. If there is no series that applies, you can disregard it and not worry about it. We do ask that you not use the series field to repeat an individual book title. This is only a field that is used when there's a collective title that applies to a subset or all of the books published for a particular program or curriculum. So in our examples below, we see the Houghton Mifflin Leveled Readers or the FOSS Full Option Science System, Next Generation. And these are generally designations that you will see on the printed book, on the PDFs that the vendor receives from the publisher across, a number of books that are being submitted. And so that's kind of the way that you can identify, hey, this is a series. It's showing up on multiple books or all of the books for a particular program. Next, we have the sourcebook ISBN. We do ask that all of the ISBNs that are found on the print book that refer to the edition that is provided in the NIMAS file set, so in other words, the identical content, that those be included for searching in the record. One of the important things is we ask that you not include the hyphens. This is because of the way that the NIMAC system searches. If you actually include those hyphens, then what's going to happen when the user does the search? Well, first of all, we'll fix it. So this won't actually happen. But if we weren't to fix it, then it would actually look for all of those little pieces of the ISBN in any other ISBN that's in the system. So for searching, we just want you to be sure to leave out the hyphens. We would also say that we would not want you to add the ISBNs for editions that are not identical to the content of the NIMAS file set. Every now and then we might get a NIMAS file where there's also in the ISBN metadata, the ISBN for the teacher's edition, which is not the identical content. So just as a note about that. Now, conversely, oh, it is not. Oh, sorry about that. It looks like we were having a little bit of a technical issue there. So ISBNs for the identical content. The flip side of not including ISBNs that are not the identical content is that you are welcome to include for searching ISBNs that are for the identical content, even when those don't appear on the print book. So just as an example of this, sometimes for advanced placement books, there will also be an identical ISBN that's distributed to the college market. And occasionally the NIMAC will actually get an inquiry from a school or a school district that says, we've purchased this edition. They've actually purchased the college edition for their advanced placement class, and they're wondering if we have a file for it. And we've actually received the advanced placement edition. So in those cases, you are welcome to include that. We do encourage you to include a publisher note if you happen to include those kinds of ISBNs and they don't appear on the book. Another example is that occasionally there are different bindings. There may be a hardcover ISBN and a softcover ISBN, and both of those ISBNs may not appear on the PDF of the file set that you're submitting. And so, again, you're welcome to include that alternative ISBN, but a publisher note is recommended to clarify what that other ISBN refers to. So next, we're going to talk about sourcebook pagination. This is an optional field. You do not have to supply it. If you choose to supply it, we do ask that you follow the format that each last numbered page for each section is included, separated by commas, and then followed by a P with a period. And you can just disregard unnumbered pages. We would ask that you not provide the total number of physical pages. And the reason for this is that it's just on the file review side, it's not practical for us to go back and try to go through the XML and the numbered pages and for us to figure it out. So basically, if you include the pagination but you don't format it correctly, we're basically going to take it out. So it can be really useful and helpful to users. So we invite you to submit it, but we do ask that you format it in the correct way. So state or national edition, this is required metadata for all NIMAS files. And this is actually really important information because if you are a publisher or you're a vendor that's worked with a lot of files, you may be aware that we can have many different state editions for the same textbook. Um, as well as a national edition. And so this is just really important in terms of ensuring that users don't download the wrong edition of the textbook. So what we're looking for here is whether or not the book has been customized for use only by students in one state or if it is distributed nationwide. A lot of times there's not going to be any designation at all on the PDF or the printed book. And in those cases, just assume that it's a national edition. We do ask that you use the U.S. Postal Code abbreviation followed by ED period to capture this, or just national ed if it is the national edition. And if you have any questions, feel free either to reach out to the publisher or to reach out to the NIMAC. One of the things that I do like to point out is that whether it's a state or national edition does not have anything to do with the state that has required NIMAS for the title. Occasionally there'll be some confusion about that. This only has to do with whether the textbook itself has been customized for use in only one state. So a couple of examples here. We have a title, My World Interactive, Kentucky World History, Growth and Expansion of Civilization. We see that there's a state name that's actually incorporated into the title. That's a Kentucky edition. The next title, Geography Alive, Regions and People. No state is indicated. We just are going to assume that that is a national edition. The next required metadata that we have is the subject. One subject must be supplied for all NIMAS files, but up to 3 may be provided. Alexa has just dropped the subject list in the chat. This is available on the website version of the NIMAC metadata guidelines, as well as in the downloadable version. So we ask that you ensure that you only use those metadata that are supplied there. In terms of the way that the NIMAC search works, it's a pick list for our users. And so if you use a subject that's not included, then it's not going to work. So it will have to be changed. We do ask also that if there's a general as well as a more specific term possible, and this doesn't come up a lot, but occasionally it does. And math is one example. If you have an algebra textbook, choose algebra rather than mathematics. And supplementary reading materials, reading is always a subject for those, and so those are really simple and quick. Just choose reading and you are good to go. So a couple of examples here. Prentice Hall Middle School Math, Mathematics, Discovering Geometry, Geometry. Badger Learns to Ride a Bike, Supplementary Reader, Reading. Next, we have text publication year. This is actually one of those, again, it's a required metadata element in the NIMAS specification, and it refers to the year that the specific edition or ISBN was first published. And amazingly, this can sometimes be tricky information to locate or discern. However, it is required, and it may or may not be the same as the copyright year or the printing date. So if you are having trouble figuring out what the publication date should be, and there is not a statement on the print book, you can check with the publisher or you can reach out to the NIMAC. We'd be happy to help with that. As a special note, due to a quirk in the NIMAS specification, we do require that publication year be captured in the OPF using both of the elements, the DC terms date issued and the NIMAS-source date in the OPF. And again, if you have any questions, just let us know. So next, we're going to spend a few moments here going into a little more depth about the title. Uh, this can often be really complicated and confusing for K through 12 instructional materials, as there are often many title elements that are found on the print book. And we don't, basically what we're trying to do on the NIMAC side is to ensure that they are complete and also kind of address them in a logical and systematic way in order to facilitate searching by our users. And so the first major thing here is that we want to ensure that the complete title is captured. And as Liz mentioned earlier, sometimes this metadata may be found on the title page or it may only be found on the covers. And so in those cases, we want to ensure that it is captured and that those covers are included in the PDF. So in this particular example, we see that when we look from top to bottom on the actual title page, it says grade 5 home connections, and then bridges in mathematics is actually the last thing on the PDF. And so the observation here is just that the logical order for the title, it may or may not represent what appears first to last on the PDF. And so that's just something to kind of keep in mind. On this next example here, we see that there's actually an ancillary title here, and it is homework and remembering, and it only shows up on the back cover of the book. So this is actually one of those examples where that complete title and the ancillary title in this case, it is really, really important because, for example, if only the front cover title was captured here, that would be identical to the core textbook for this program, so that main title, California Math Expressions, Common Core Grade 2, Volume 1. Again, just to disambiguate, it's really essential to make sure that that ancillary title from the back cover is captured as well. The next slide here, we're talking a little bit about title and grade. As we've already discussed, grade level is captured elsewhere in the NIMAS OPF, and so grade is generally not supplied in a title unless it actually appears on the title page or wherever you're pulling the complete title from. However, an exception to that, if the grade level is required to distinguish between otherwise identical titles, we do ask that you include it in brackets. And this is something that it can come up with some reading curriculum. Sometimes it can come up with math curriculum. And so this can be really, really important. In the example here, we have a McGraw-Hill Reading Wonders. And basically, that's the complete title that is found on the title page in this case. However, that title is identical across several grades of the program, so we've included grade 4 in brackets just to avoid any confusion regarding what file set is represented for in this particular case. Another pointer that we just like to emphasize is title capitalization. For the NIMAC, for the NIMAS metadata, we do follow just regular English capitalization rules, regardless of how capitalization appears on the print book. So in this case, on the PDF, we see single variable calculus is provided in all caps. That's just, for the design, which is fine. But we would just capture that using normal English title capitalization. Similarly, if you have Spanish titles, we will follow Spanish capitalization rules, and the difference there is that generally only the first word in the title and any proper nouns are capitalized. If you have any questions about that, feel free to reach out. We're happy to assist with that. Next, I want to talk about title and numerical addition. We talked about numerical addition before in terms of the uh, the fact that is required, and it's required whenever that it does appear on the PDF. We want to ensure that that is a specific metadata statement in the OPF, and it's generally not included in the title. So we see here in this example, we have the title is marine biology or introduction to marine biology. And again, not captured in all caps. And then we have that third edition is captured separately in the numerical edition metadata, right? So you don't have to include that there. Similarly, state edition is generally not captured in the title. In this particular example here, we see global history and geography too, and that New York edition statement, it's up at the top of the PDF. We see that in the little outline of the state. And so in this case, we see that it is a state edition. We're going to capture that in the correct metadata element for that metadata. Now, there is a caveat there, and that is that occasionally, as with that Kentucky title that we saw a few moments ago in a different example, sometimes the state name is actually incorporated into the title phrase. And in those cases where it's integrated in that way, it should be retained in the title metadata. So this is an example of that case. We have Envision Plus, California Mathematics, Grade 5, Volume 2. And so we can see from the PDF that that California designation, it's actually in the title phrase, and so it makes sense to capture that both in the state edition metadata and in the title. So, and again, sometimes this can be very nuanced and confusing, so just feel free to reach out if you have any question about a specific title. So with that, are there any questions before I hand it off to Liz for just a few final reminders?
Hi, I was wondering if the subject list could be expanded to include more CTE titles. We struggle with choosing the subject area for a lot of our titles.
That is a really great question, and we are quite open to expanding the subject list. So if you would like to reach out to us directly about that with your suggestions, we'd be more than happy to consider adding those. And thank you for bringing that up because this doesn't come up very often. But if you find that you have a situation where there really aren't good subject choices, do feel free to reach out, and we'd be happy to consider adding those terms.
Great, thank you.
Hmm. Thank you for asking. Any other questions? Okay, well, Liz, take it away.
All right, thanks, Nicole. So just a final reminder here, when we're talking about metadata, that in addition to the OPF metadata, the doc title is required in the XML, and the doc title should match the title metadata that's found in the OPF. If we make an edit to the title metadata in the NIMAC system in the process of reviewing and certifying a file, that change will automatically save to the doc title in the XML. So we don't need the vendor to go back and edit that doc title element in the XML file. It will just automatically save that change for us. Doc author is not required in the NIMAS 1.1 specification, but it is strongly recommended. And the doc author should capture just the first or primary author only. That element does not need to repeat. This presentation today, the recording as well as the PowerPoint and the recordings from the previous presentations in this series are all available on our website. We also have links out to the resources that we referenced, like the metadata guidelines, the specification, as well as other downloadable resources as well that may be helpful to you as you're preparing your NIMAS file sets. We did do a little refresh of our informational website last year, so this is the home page, the landing page of our informational website. There's a link at the very bottom to the publishers and conversion houses section. You can also use the navigation menu at the top right corner. It's a drop-down menu that will take you to the publisher section as well. And then again, just a friendly reminder that we do have our final webinar in our publisher series coming up tomorrow, and that is specifically geared toward publishers and those folks at publishing houses that are assisting customers directly. So please do join us for that. If you have any questions at all, maybe you think of something later on today, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at nimac@aph.org or give us a call. Alexa put our contact information in the chat for you. And finally, here up on the screen, we have our exit survey link. If you could take just a moment to complete our exit survey, we would love to hear what you thought of this webinar. It's the first time we've done this one, so we would love to hear what you thought. If you have any feedback, things you think we should incorporate, or other trainings or resources that would be helpful for you as you're preparing NIMAS files, please let us know. There is an open response question in the survey that's specifically for that. So please take just a moment to fill that out for us. We'd really appreciate it. And with that, are there any final questions? We have a few minutes here if anyone has any questions. I haven't been able to look at the chat, so I don't know if anyone put any questions in the chat either. All right, I will go ahead and stop our recording.